Ignite to impact.
Hi, this is Dr. Geneva, and welcome once again to Ignite to Impact. And I just want you to know that I am bringing to you today one of my longest compadres, worker in the field together, creating change together individual. You know, someone who's a leader in so many different ways. And we've worked together almost 40 years on various projects in various organizations together, creating all kinds of impact at the local, state and national level. And I thought I would bring him here today because I wanted to really get down deep and personal about what I call everyday leadership. So I'm talking about Mr. Ed Egnatios, and he's here today. He's got a lot of different hats on, but he's here in studio currently as the program officer at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. But he's been a program officer at the Skillman Foundation, president of the International Institute. He used to be a business owner of a well-known furniture company. So he's had that insight from the profit side to the nonprofit side. And, well, he's really got a whole lot of insight about a whole lot of stuff. So, hey, Ed, how are you?
Well, very well. Thank you, Geneva. What a kind introduction. That's way too nice. You never identified all the little blemishes and the not such a good start that sometimes happens. But thank you very much. That's
but,
wonderful.
but isn't that what really makes a great leader?
That is.
That is going through those blemishes, going through those valleys, doing that kind of tough stuff, making those mistakes and learning and getting back up.
That's correct.
So
I think that is actually, that's a great place to start. I really believe that we are the sum total of our experiences, and our experience, and it's not fair to people to only share the good. It's the tough and the challenging and the setbacks that make good leaders. And I think when good leaders really share what happens, they really say, I learned a lot more from that setback than I did from that wonderful success, although wonderful success is important. And so it's how do you kind of come to grips with that? Yeah.
And so how do you, Ed, learn from, you made a couple mistakes, maybe, through the ranks, but how do you learn from them? What are the 1, 2, 3s that you do?
Well, I think that's a great question, actually. Sometime I want to tell you this little story.
Please.
That I was at a conference as a speaker, panel speaker for at the Aspen Institute on behalf of Kellogg, and they had a panel discussion of some of our younger colleagues. And the younger colleagues, it was right around the time when Black Lives Matter was breaking, and it was just horrendous situations in which young black men were being hurt, killed, for the dumbest reasons. And there were 3 young program officers, and one of the program officers at a very well-known, very big foundation, not Kellogg as it turns out, but could have been, said, "I'm so worried that they're going to fire me if I take a stand." And that echoed among the other panelists. And I turned to somebody who was sitting next to me and I said, if you aren't fired 3 or 4 times in your career, you probably never took the right positions that needed to be taken in terms of leadership. And so for me, the setbacks were actually the time when I was really asked to learn the most. I was asked to assess what was important and what was not important. And what was important for me was to figure out how do you learn from it and yet at the same time don't back off taking the risk that you have to take as someone who believes in certain values, stands for certain values. Now, I have to say that without a strong faith, a deep-rooted religious faith, that probably would have been much tougher. And was tough enough on its own. But nevertheless, with that faith and with the idea that everything serves towards helping us understand who we are and what we're meant to do, that's been really the way that I've been able to handle that.
You know, and hearing you talk about that, you know, reminds me of so many, you know, mistakes and errors and it's about oftentimes, I think, in the midst of those challenges, that the core values or the things that you value the most kind of keep you instead. Do you find that values make a difference and play a role in great leadership?
I think it's essential. I think you cannot segregate a person who really cares about doing a good job, cares about others, and yet also articulates a clear set of both objectives and vision. You know, so it's not just the hill that you want to take, because I think that there's a lot of people that can take a hill. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sorry for the military kind of analogy, but you know, a lot of people can accomplish an objective, but it's how do you do that in service to that objective and to a much larger vision. And that's always been what's important to me in terms of leadership.
And so how do you determine that much larger vision? What does that mean?
Well, you know, again, I think part of that is is shaped by the experiences that we come through. I mean, clearly.
So what's your vision? Maybe that's a better way. Maybe that's a
Well,
better way to share your vision.
Well, that's interesting. I think as a baby boomer and coming through the 60s and the 70s, what was important, what I really asked myself early on in college was that why was I where I was and others were not? Mm-hmm. Okay. And what was I given, and therefore what is part of the responsibility of stewarding that gift in a way that was really special. And therefore, why can't other people all have that? Mm-hmm. And as I begin to ask that question, which I now identify very much as a disparity question, as an equity question, mm-hmm. but I wasn't thinking like that. I was just thinking, why weren't others given the same gifts, and obviously, food and home and shelter and mm-hmm. love of parents and, and faith and, a number of things. But asking that question began to lead me down a path. And mm-hmm. as that began to lead me down a path, it became really clear my goal was to do the best that I could to help others with what their talent is, bring out that talent, and then to do that in service of a world that does a better job for doing that. Mm-hmm. So in the language of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, mm-hmm. A place where all children thrive mm-hmm. and all families have the opportunity mm-hmm. of making it. But that's also, much bigger than just one foundation. It's really mm-hmm. about, what we believe in as citizens, what we believe in as members of a nation that is in a deep cultural divide and deep conflict. How do we move beyond that and build a future?
Mm-hmm. And so you took this idea, dream, vision that you had as a younger person, and you began to go to or led to various employment stops, mm-hmm. opportunities. Mm-hmm. And have you been able, through your journey, would you say you've been able to carry out your vision? And if so, how'd you do it?
Well, Geneva, I'm not sure carry it out, because that suggests that it's done. I'm really far from that. Okay. But I'm very excited about each of the stops along the way, or each of the phases along the way. And I really think it's extraordinary. I mean, mm-hmm. I really... So my journey in this area really starts in Cleveland. I went to John Carroll University, which is hardly a super name, but it was a place that I had graduated from UAD Jesuit in the city, and it was another Jesuit college, and I thought it provide an opportunity. But what was fascinating is it was in the fall of '68 that I actually hit the campus. And so my first experience with Cleveland was walking door to door on election day with Carl Stokes' picture on one side of my jacket, and Congressman Louis Stokes. So Carl Stokes was the first African American mayor of Cleveland, and Louis Stokes, his brother, was one of the first African American congressmen. So we were doing a get out the vote, and I was walking door to door in a part of Cleveland called the Huff area, which was at that time one of the poorest communities in the city of Cleveland. And frankly, that was my first experience. I certainly had experiences in Detroit and certainly had done things, but nothing like this in-depth kind of work. And, it wasn't even that in-depth, to tell you the truth. But for a college student,
it was.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Right. It's pretty cool. Huh?
Yeah. And so that experience and the experience of Cleveland really led me to a strong commitment that our cities have to be better than what they were, that we can do better than that. We just cannot ask people to live under conditions that are not acceptable. I still didn't know what that meant. And so 4 years later, I actually had a pretty interesting experience on the near west side of Cleveland with I worked with a group of Puerto Ricans, and one young man said, "Why are you here?" I mean, it was a classic challenge. And asked us, several college students, why are you in our community? What are you doing here? And it was great because this young man was a Vietnam at 21. At 21, I hadn't done anything. At 21, he was a Vietnam veteran. He was a member of the Young Lords out of New York. And he had come home to Cleveland to kind of lead the social change in Cleveland.
Okay.
And so the answer to that question was really defining for me in terms of journey. And we said, and I think on my feet. I think you know that.
Yes.
I some of our brothers and sisters, want to process it and think about it a long time. Not, but that didn't work in this situation. He's
right. Yeah, you had to give that answer.
Oh, he's got.
So what did you say?
So I said, I'm here in order to learn. And you got some experiences that we can benefit from, and we have some experiences you can benefit from, because we understand you want to build a coffee house and serve this community and bring in speakers and have it really, and we know how to do that. So how about an exchange?
Okay.
Now this is an interesting, and he said, okay, I can go with that. I really can, I can accept that.
And you've been doing that ever since.
Well, no, he said one more thing. He said, well, as long as you commit. He said, the reason we have the conditions we have is because where you're from has got all the privileges, and you need to go back and change that. Okay, that's a deal. I'll do that.
Okay.
I came back to Detroit, and I haven't left yet. I mean, and this young man should have been the mayor of Cleveland. And unfortunately, about 3 months later, we attended his funeral, and it was, it was devastating.
So you've been in philanthropy for a long, long time, and you're living out this vision that you've painted for us, that you've described for us. So, how is it being in philanthropy? You've been Kellogg Foundation, Skillman Foundation, you work with funders from all across the country. You're still with that national funders group, aren't you?
Right.
Heading it up, or
Well, I'm not heading it anymore.
Okay.
My term is up. But
okay, but you did.
I co-chaired. It's called the Neighborhood Funders Group.
Right.
And it's really an affinity group of a foundation program officers who really believe in racial justice and social justice, and believe that philanthropy can actually move the needle, can actually change the conditions for many of our communities of color, many of our communities that have experienced dramatic racism and dramatic disparities in terms of health and education and jobs.
Mm-hmm. So what is like this group believes that philanthropy can move the needle, mm-hmm. that philanthropy can influence tremendous, long-lasting impact. How can philanthropy do that? And when we're talking about philanthropy, define that for our listeners.
Well, philanthropy is that broad range of topics that have to do with giving back. And I think most everyone who's listening probably is a philanthropist, meaning you've given. Most people have given in some way or form. Maybe they give through their faith and their church or their synagogue, or maybe they give in volunteering time, and maybe they actually give a donation. All of those are wonderful and an essential part of understanding what philanthropy is. It's giving. Mm-hmm. But there's also an organized group of special entities that have tax breaks for wealth that's accumulated over many, many decades, or even just last week. Mm-hmm. And that wealth can then be given out in such a way that it protects its perpetual existence, and at the same time is for the good of others, for charity or for the good of others. So there are two types of philanthropy. Mm-hmm. There's one type that's really about charity. And God knows people need help. So helping individuals, helping groups, helping a whole category of folks, that's very important. Mm-hmm. But the philanthropy that I've been involved with is called strategic philanthropy. Okay. And it's philanthropy in which a very substantial resources are dedicated to a particular group, a particular group of people in need, and trying to deal with that in a long-term way, not just in a short-term way, but a long-term way. So that's why the term strategic. Mm-hmm. It makes choices about that. It's not just charity, it's not just helping, but it's really about how do you get at the root causes of this problem, and then how do you get towards a long-term solution. Mm-hmm. So the Kellogg Foundation is dedicated to children. It's a children's foundation with a particular emphasis on 0 to 8 years old. Mm-hmm. The Skillman Foundation was also a children's foundation, but with a very strong emphasis on K through 12. Kindergarten through 12th grade, and youth development, and how you develop from being a young person to an adult and build success. But in both of those cases, it's very important to note that you cannot have that kind of success, particularly in our communities of color, like Detroit, without having a family focus, a family context. And if mom and dad or grandma and grandpa are not employed, then that family is going to have a hard time thriving. I'm not saying they cannot. I'm going to say they have all the odds stacked against them. And so a job, more importantly, a career, a living wage, not just a minimum wage, and family economic security sets the basis. And at Kellogg, we really acknowledge this, sets the basis for children to thrive. And then there needs to be a whole lot of things in place to help all children thrive, and particularly our children in Detroit and other priority places that we have at Kellogg.
If you're just joining me, I'm talking with Ed Egnatios, who's the program officer at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, but who's had a long history in philanthropy. And we're talking about visioning, strategic thinking, strategic planning, how you can make tremendous change. You know, Ed, on this podcast, I always talk about we bring folk the stories of influencers, whether they're celebrity and out front and on the stage, or whether they're everyday folk working in neighborhoods, because they all influence. They're all about making tremendous, long-lasting impact, pushing through fear, pushing through challenges to make a difference. You've had a lot of experience with what we call that everyday leadership. So, share some of that with us.
Well, it's like that's a great question, and
Yes.
it really opens up a whole range.
I know.
So I was very honored and privileged to make the move from being in the for-profit sector and then in the nonprofit sector, and in which we spent a lot of time together, Geneva, and particularly as executives at United Way. And I had a chance to work under your leadership, and it was fabulous. There's no question about it. But the opportunity to move into philanthropy is really an honor and a privilege, particularly, I think, for those of us who were born during a time of social change, who made a commitment of our life to social justice and racial justice, and actually have examples of that, and then to have the chance to actually help others through investing funds. So I had the chance to join the Skillman Foundation under the leadership of Carol Goss, and I was a program officer investing in 2 of the 6 neighborhoods that were part of the good neighborhoods. Now, part of this whole effort was really about committing to 6 areas of the city with the largest numbers of children, and how do you help the conditions for those children get better? How do you help children to gain a strong voice and become active and successful citizens? And at the same time, how do you help their parents become stronger advocates? Well, what you find out is that residents are already strong advocates. They're already good people. They already have all kinds of wonderful assets.
And then when you say residents, you're talking about people living in neighborhoods.
In neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. And they're already very much want more for their children. So when given the opportunity to say what they want for their children, it was fascinating. They were clear, they were strong. And so our commitment was, we'll stand with you for 10 years, and we'll spend this significant amount of money over 10 years. And they said, well, that's amazing, because we've had lots of broken promises. We've had lots of other things that didn't come through. And our city is important to us, but we're tired. We're about ready to give up. And they said, we want to do this. So if they committed to do that, we committed that kind of relationship. And so that really is what happened. And literally, we had the chance to help adults and young people gain stronger voice, work together to make their neighborhood better, and actually gain skills that actually brought out the best talents they already had, and made that talent come together in a way that they are still working in those neighborhoods. So 5 of those 6 neighborhoods were extraordinarily successful, and the one that was a little tougher with the entity is successful and has all kinds of other things now taking that leadership role.
So what did you learn from that everyday leadership? And I think when we say, at least when I say everyday leadership, I'm thinking about the leaders who don't necessarily have a title or position.
Right.
Okay. What did you learn from that type of leadership?
The amazing thing to me, Geneva, was that you cannot ask a community to get better. You can't ask people to work hard and to believe in something if you don't listen and work with people first. And that listening and respecting and working with the assets people already have, and then helping them build the vision they see, is part of the work that made that Good Neighborhoods work successful. And so in building up that capacity, and one other thing, you have to address power. That it's not about everybody holding hands, singing Kumbaya. That's nothing wrong with that. I love that. That's a great thing. But it also has to address power. And so how do you help to set up the conditions where residents in the neighborhoods of the city of Detroit have the power to have say over their future, have opportunities just like everyone else, and at the same time build a more just resource distribution in the long haul and change the larger system in the long haul. And so that's what we did with the Good Neighborhoods work. And so now we're embarked in a way in which we're saying, well, 1/3 of the city is pretty together. There are 2 Detroits. And there's lots of different versions of that analysis. But one analysis says there's one set of Detroit that is doing well, and people are involved, and they're shaping their neighborhood and their investments. And these are regular, everyday, low and moderate income people. These are not. I'm not talking about the rich neighborhoods. There's a couple of those, and I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about regular, everyday neighborhoods. But there's 2/3 of the city that don't have staffed, supported, resident-led organizations. So we've just found a solution to that. We're really very excited.
And what is that?
Well,
tell it.
Well, I got to tell you, this is. We all agreed to do a soft launch, so I'm going to ask forgiveness of my multiple partners in this. And it is just it's 3 years of work, but we have 8 foundations that are working together now to pool funds and to join with the federal agency called the Community Action Agency. You know, that came out of the 60s and came out of the civil rights movement.
Yeah,
it came
the CAP
out of
agency.
Right, and it's and it literally is the way in which the federal government still invests.
Right.
Sometimes they do, don't do it enough, or they don't do it quite well. But the group that's running it for the city of Detroit today has joined with us. So that's 9 major funders, all agreeing that none of us can do our individual work if we don't have a base upon which to work and build. And that base is really got to be resident leaders. And resident leaders are going to shape Detroit's future. Resident leaders are going to help the mayor and help business to make this an inclusive and prosperous Detroit for all. And resident leaders are going to push back on that if they have some vision of making Detroit only for some. Now, they don't have the money. We don't even have the money that, some of our wealthy individuals have and are buying up skyscrapers and things like that. But it looks like we're going to be able to put a fund together. We've got about $3.5 million already, and it looks like we're going to be able to put a fund of $5 million together to have a resident leadership academy and actually be able to give funding to support staff and train residents to make their neighborhoods better and to be leaders. And then to be able to take that leadership on into their private life, not just in their public life.
Exactly, because, that's leadership is in all areas of your life. You got to be able to lead your life and self-development. Well, that's exciting. And so what's your prognosis? I mean, is this going to work? Is it going to be, 3 years from now you'll be back telling me about another venture? Or is this going to work? Are we going to be able to leverage leadership through this kind of investment?
I really believe that the city, we now have a government that's functional. It's not perfect, but it's definitely functional. We have business that's interested in making money like they've always been, but they're seeing that that Detroiters have value. And this is going to say, invest in us, residents, and we're going to help make the city of Detroit the greatest growth story. It's not comeback because it didn't go anyplace, but the greatest growth story. And it's interesting that we've already got markers. There's a national study that only 11 cities in the country have actually had prosperity growth over the last 5 years and had inclusion on all of the measures that they use. There was about 11 different measures. Okay. And there's only 11 cities, and Detroit is one of those. Oh. So we've already seen it's coming. Now, we're very excited about Entrepreneurs of Color Fund. We're very excited about Prosper Us. We're excited about our other brothers and sisters in the philanthropy world. And, to be fair, when you've seen a foundation, you only see one foundation. You don't, they all aren't the same. But this group has decided that it's in residents we should invest. And as we invest in residents, resident leadership will push the work. And CDAD, the Community Development Advocates for Detroit, will be the lead technical assistance provider in this work. So we're pretty excited. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, it sounds so phenomenal. Such an opportunity to create tremendous impact, and long-lasting. So tremendous long-lasting impact is the way to go. I mean, if we can do it. I got to have you back, to kind of have more conversations about leadership and influence. And is there anything else that you'd like to say or share with our listeners who are familiar with the Detroit story, but who come from all around the country?
Well, I think, I learned leadership from two people. I had the opportunity to actually work with my father in the business setting. And of course, nothing like business that really asks you to test every one of your ideals and really see if those ideals work. And I was thrilled. I mean, not only was he an outstanding leader, an outstanding supervisor, but it was also a chance to really test. And our furniture store was the last fine furniture store operating in the city of Detroit. And we turned it from the worst profit per square foot to the highest profit per square foot in the whole chain. So it was pretty cool. And the second outstanding leader that I've had a chance to work with was yourself. And I know, and this is not just because this is your show. It really, and we've had conversations about this from time to time. I think that a good leader really serves others, is committed to partnering with those folks to identify and grow their own talent, and all of that in service of objectives and vision. And you did that masterfully. And I want to say that has given me a chance to really establish a standard for my own leadership, because I do think I believe we serve others. But at the same time, I also have had to deal with that there's a whole lot of leaders that are not quite there yet, don't even quite understand that, let alone have the right tools and practices. And I really think your dedication of this podcast to that is a great idea.
Well, thank you, Ed. I mean, I really appreciate hearing that, because it's all about creating that impact. That's right. So let's all say thank you to you again, Ed Egnatios. We're going to have you back, and I would love for you to come back to talk about collaboration and what it is, what's the rhetoric of it, how we define it, and how folk can really make a difference through working together. So I'm going to have you back to talk about that at least. So thank you so much for being with us on Ignite to Impact.
Thank you, Geneva. Thanks for having me.
Ignite to Impact.